we'll get going now. So I say thanks to you both for joining us today. Really glad to have you here for today's webinar. And today we're going to be focusing on neurodiversity in the workplace. So this is actually a second webinar in this little mini series. Really, I don't know if you can call a two-part thing a mini series, but that's what it is. So the first one was about neurodiversity awareness in general, and that was recorded. That took place before Christmas, and that's available via our Differently Wired hub, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But I'd say this one is focusing on neurodiversity in the workplace. So looking at the benefits and opportunities, but also maybe some challenges that neurodiversity can bring in the workplace. So you might employ some neurodiverse people, or you might work with some neurodiverse people, or you might be neurodivergent yourself. Whatever it is, obviously, I think it's common knowledge that if everyone in the organisation can work to their strengths and make best use of their abilities, and obviously we know that everyone, whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse, brings unique skill sets to the workplace, and if everyone can tap into those and make best use of them, then everyone wins. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. How can we best support and encourage both neurodiverse and neurotypical people to work together really well and increase that business success through different skill sets and opportunities. So our host today, I mean, I'm sort of managing this. I'm Michael. I'm the communications officer at Foothold. But the main host today is going to be Colin Foley, which is this guy, obviously you already know, and he's the National Training Director at the ADHD Foundation. So it's a brilliant charity who work to improve the life chances of those with ADHD, but also other neurodiverse conditions as well, like dyspraxia, dyslexia, Tourette's, and all those different conditions. So I'm really glad to be joined by him today, and as I say, I'll be handing over to him in just a minute. But before I do, just a quick whistle-stop tour about Foothold and who we are and what we do, and a bit more, as I say, about our Differently Wired hub and the project that's attached to that around neurodiversity and engineering. So just before we get into the main bit, I do have a little video, which is why I wanted to share my sound. So this will tell you a little bit more about our Engineering Neurodiverse Futures project. Oh, I've got someone in the lobby. Hold on, let me just let them in. All right. Oh, here we are. Oh, there we are. Okay, I think that's Sarah. I think maybe you dropped out. Sorry, did you drop out there, Sarah? I do apologise for that. Hopefully you didn't miss too much. But as I say, I'm just going into the little video about our Differently Wired hub and our Engineering Neurodiverse Futures project. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. It's only a minute long. Sorry. Okay, so there you go. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information, excuse me, about our Engineering Neurodiverse Futures program and our Differently Wired hub. So the Differently Wired Hub is a online resource which has loads of expert information, resources and guidance on a range of neurodiverse conditions. So you can learn, I mean, if you are neurodiverse or you think you might be, you can learn more about your condition there, and how you can manage it and utilize it in different scenarios as well, different skill sets that it brings. But also, again, if you support someone or you employ people or you work with people who are neurodiverse, that's really useful as well. And it is completely free to join. So if you are interested in that and you want to learn more about it, you can go to the Foothold website and find it on our homepage as well. Don't worry about jotting down that link. But yeah, I'd recommend going and checking that out, because it's very, very relevant to what we're going to talk about today. We offer wider support, obviously, at Foothold as well. We don't just do neurodiversity. We offer a full range of support across the spectrum. So we offer financial support, work-life support, legal support, all these different kind of things that sometimes life can throws curveballs in, and you're not necessarily prepared for these challenges, and they can just sometimes happen. And we understand that can be traumatic for people, and it can put people into situations that can be quite difficult to get out of. And that's why we're here. We're a lifeline for the engineering community, and that's why we offer this type of support. We also offer a range of digital support as well, and this webinar would be one of those. So we have, as I say, monthly webinars on various topics, not just neurodiversity, again, across the full spectrum of support that we offer. We have an app as well, which has legal advice on it, expert blogs by people in the engineering community, but also people who are experts in different areas like neurodiversity, for example. And we have our wellbeing hub as well, which is another online resource where you can learn how to take better care of your wellbeing. And just one final thing before I do hand over to Colin. I understand I've been talking for quite a while now. We do offer all this digital support for free, and that's obviously funded through generous donations from our community and gifts in wills from engineers and their families. So if you do have, I know obviously things are tight at the minute, but if you do have just only a little amount to spare, and you'd like to keep our support going for free for the community, we would recommend, well, not recommend, like I say, we would ask for a donation, maybe just like, again, £5, £10. It doesn't have to be anything massive. Every little helps, and it does mean that we can continue to provide this support for free for the community across the globe. So it's really, really useful for a lot of people. So yeah, if you do enjoy the content today, and you do have a few pennies to spare, then I would ask you to consider making a donation if that's okay. So that's all from me. I'll pass over to Colin now, and I hope you enjoy the session. Thanks, guys. So I'll just stop sharing my screen, Colin, and you can share yours. Okay. Sorry. So if you start sharing your screen.
Share my screen, everybody.
And just one thing as well, actually, as I mentioned earlier, there is the chat as well. So if you do have any questions for Colin throughout the presentation, we will be answering those at the end. So yeah, as I say, use it to talk to each other, talk to Colin, whatever it is, ask questions, and we'll get to those at the end.
Okay, thanks a lot, Michael. I'm just going to share my slides, which don't seem to be coming up, Michael. We did this a minute ago and it did work.
I can see them.
Can you? I can't.
Yeah. Guys, if you could just put in the chat whether you can see them or not.
Yes, sir, I
can see them on my... Oh, okay. Yeah, brilliant. There you go. So yeah, they must be working, Colin.
Okay, I can't see them, Michael.
Okay, that's weird.
Might be the case. Sorry about this, everybody. Just give us a second just to work this out. Shall I try again, Michael?
Yeah, try again. Yeah, it might be that you're in presenter.
Yes, we're on. Okay.
There you go. Right. Brilliant. Yeah, I can see those. Perfect.
Hello, everybody. My name is Colin Foley. Greetings from Liverpool. I hope that you're all okay. Can I just say a big thank you for giving up at this time in your very busy day to engage with this webinar. Can I just say also a big thank you to Foothold, for Michael for organising all of today, for Fliss as well for doing the initial setup and meetings with me and asking me to do this. I'm really, really pleased to be asked to present this webinar for Foothold, and I've got to applaud Foothold really in terms of the prominence that they are putting on neurodiversity at the moment. I mean, I've had a look at the Differently Wired Hub. I would encourage you, if you haven't done that yet, to have a look there, and it's credit to Foothold really to really place neurodiversity front and centre in some of the work that they are doing. And I remember in the first meeting that I had with Fliss talking about engineering and talking about what we think is a very high percentage percentage of neurodiverse people involved in all sectors related to engineering, as you saw on the slide that Michael presented then. So you're very welcome, everybody. This is, as Michael said, the second in a series of 2 webinars. If you joined us for the first one, or you've seen the recording, then thanks very much for coming back. But if you haven't, can I really encourage you to go and have a look at that? It's on the Differently Wired Hub on the Foothold website. It's called Introduction to Neurodiversity. I will do a little bit of a recap very quickly now, but then in that session, I was talking about some of an introduction to what the concept of neurodiversity is, the difference in which different brains function. And also I was talking about some of the issues that we have at the moment in 2023 with relatively low levels of identification and diagnosis across the board in all neurodiverse conditions. Interestingly, you saw 2 slides there that Michael presented, which were both 2 engineers saying that they had obviously were diagnosed as neurodiverse as adults, and then things had started to slot into place and people had felt like they knew each other much better. I hope you can still see the slides, because that just kind of went off for a second. And also some of the issues around girls and women that we talked about, the under-identification and diagnosis of girls and women in every single neurodevelopmental condition. We also talked about some of the vulnerabilities that go with being neurodiverse, particularly around mental health and anxiety. But also, and we in the ADHD Foundation are really passionate about this, is that we need to flip the narrative around this, around neurodiversity. And as Michael said, we need to really focus upon what are the unique skills and qualities that go with being neurodiverse. And I'll tell you this, everyone, it's a very, very exciting time to be working in this field, because we are seeing a huge increase in the number of people, organisations, businesses, schools, colleges, universities who are really interested in this area. And when I started this job 7 years ago, we were very much talking about how do we keep children in classrooms, how do we keep people in employment. We were looking at it very much as a deficit model. What can we do to help people? Now the conversation, of course, is still encompasses those sorts of discussions, but also we are beginning to talk much more openly and regularly about what unique skills and qualities does a neurodiverse person bring to, in this case, the workplace, and how do we harness those talents and those strengths so that people can absolutely thrive. So that's what I'd like you to keep in mind when we go through this presentation today. On that slide, you can see our contact details. If I inspire you today that you want to find out more about us, we've just passed 250,000 followers on all of our platforms that we're really pleased about. There's our social media platforms, there's our website address, and there's my email address if you'd like to get in touch if you think of a question tomorrow or in 6 months' time and you'd like to carry on the conversation around neurodiversity. So as Michael said, I'm going to talk for just about an hour and 10 minutes. We're going to have some opportunities at the end for Q&A if there are any questions as well. Can I say something right at the very beginning? And I did mention this when I did the first session. We haven't got the language right. And I think we need to just recognise this and sit with this. There is a lot of controversy around language. We don't get trolled very often on social media, but a lot of the trolling that we do get is around language. So there can be the language that we use around neurodiversity can stir up some quite strong feelings from people. And I always say when people do talk about language, I say we have to just say, as I said before, that we just haven't got it right. Language emerges, it changes, as you know. The word disorder, for example, we just need to, in my opinion, just really move away from that completely. If we think about a condition like ADHD, where the final D is disorder, well, what do we do about that? Who's going to make the decision? Will everybody follow? How are we going to change that name? It's very exciting what's happening in the autistic community at the moment in terms of language. 7 years ago, when I started this job, I was talking about ASD. autistic spectrum disorder. Then about 5 years ago, I was talking about ASC, autistic spectrum condition. Condition isn't a great word either, is it? And now the consensus seems to be emerging within the autistic community to just talk about autism or autistic. I used to say people with autism, and I'm trying my best not to say that. I'm sorry if I slip up today, but I was in a school last week delivering a session, and I slipped up and I said people with autism, and this woman's hand shot up straight away to kind of take me to task and challenge me about this. And of course, I was agreeing with her. I just made a mistake in that instance. What I would say to you is that if you're working with people who are neurodiverse, is take your lead from them, however they would want to describe themselves. I have a friend of mine, she's bringing up her grandson who's got ADHD and autism and attachment disorder, sensory integration disorder. And when she describes him to people that she's never met before, she always says he has high functioning autism. That's the language that she uses. Now, he is very, very bright academically, but emotionally, he's not high functioning at all. So that is a strange phrase that I don't particularly like, that doesn't sum him up. But for my friend, it's very important, she said to me, that people recognize that, you know, that academic ability, that they don't pigeonhole him as being low ability that can happen with neurodiverse people. So for her, that language really means something. So I think we should respect that. I'm going to use the word neurodiverse in this presentation. Now, when I use that term, I'm talking about people who have diagnoses or have significant traits and presentations of the conditions that we all recognise: autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, Tourette's syndrome, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. These would be the neurodiverse conditions. But let's be honest, we are all neurodiverse. Every single one of us, our brains are different. We're all diverse. That phrase, as a word, describes a quality of a population, but it's the word that we're using now, but I don't think it's the right word. You might have heard of neurodivergent. I personally don't particularly like that because it implies to me that we are diverging from some norm that I don't think exists. Neurotypical isn't great either, is it? Who wants to be thought of as typical? Okay, I am going to use that word, and when I use that word, it means people who don't have a diagnosis or they don't have significant traits and presentations and behaviours associated with neurodiverse conditions. Now, you can see, can't you, that we just haven't got the language right. Take the lead from the people that you are working with on this. Respect their use to their language use and how they choose to identify themselves. That word disabled on there, it's important to make the note, isn't it, that if you have got a neurodiverse diagnosis, that you are legally disabled under the Equality Act of 2010. I have not met anybody. I have seen a couple of people online, but I've personally not met anybody who defines themselves as disabled. And in fact, people that I know, for example, with ADHD, would have real problems with being thought of as being disabled. But legally, there is that title. Okay, so I just wanted to place that there. I did mention it in the first session, everybody. I'd like to just reinforce this and go back over this, is that everybody is unique. In the first session, I talked about some of the traits, some of the signs, some of the behaviours and presentations that are associated with different neurodiverse conditions. Remember, don't come into this, if you're neurotypical, with any set of assumptions about this person's autistic, therefore they're going to be like X, Y, and Z. Every single person is unique. As I said, everyone's brain is different. We are all the combination of our genetic inheritance, our lived experience, and the genetic factors that are on us at any particular time. And this will impact on how somebody's neurodiversity presents in them. Okay, you will have people with varying levels of what I call self-management strategies, and you'll have people with different levels of their acceptance and understanding of their neurodiversity, their own neurology. Okay, so everyone's unique. Ask, especially if you're a line manager, you know, ask somebody about it, but don't put all the responsibility on a neurodiverse person. Don't assume that they are going to be the expert in their own brain. All right. Now, I know many people who have come to their diagnosis as an adult, and they go on a journey and they become experts, and they research and they read everything that they possibly can. They really want to understand their own neurology, and they go on a bit of a journey. Not everyone is like that. Some people will be more resistant. Some people go through almost a grieving process when they're diagnosed, especially as an adult, when they start to look back and think, what could have been if I'd have known this sooner? And some people just don't want to know, for example. So don't assume that person's going to be the expert. I would always use language like, I've done some work on, for example, autism. I understand that, some of the main features of autism are X, Y, and Z. How is that for you? Okay, so you're showing willingness. You're showing that you want to enter, if you're neurotypical, into that space, but you're taking the lead from them. And really listen to what they say, because you'll get a lot of information about what they say and what they don't say. And then if you're a line manager, adapt your practices. Remember, the law says, the Equality Act says, reasonable adjustments. And this is the big, people make a living out of exploring what reasonable means. Okay, but show willingness to adapt your working practices and be ready to negotiate as well. Reasonable means that maybe you can't do everything right now. I worked with a very small team. And they said, in a company, and they said they had very, very little money, and some of the adjustments that a colleague was asking, they were just saying, we just can't afford to do this, and they had to really negotiate and compromise. But I would say here at this point, this is really important to remember as well, is that I deliver a lot of sessions for businesses and companies, and it's usually neurotypical people who want to do their best for neurodiverse employees. Okay, so they want to look after somebody. Sometimes the session will be around a particular individual who's just disclosed or just been diagnosed with a condition, and there's a real willingness of, what can we do? Remember, it's a two-way street all the time. Remember that it is incumbent upon the neurodiverse person to look after themselves, to learn for themselves. How do I live well with this diagnosis? How do I get myself into a physical and mental position where I am healthy and fit to do the job that I've signed up for, the contract that I've signed, the money that I'm taking? So it is a two-way street. And I've done many, many sessions where people have told me about all kinds of adjustments that they've done, and some of it's not worked. And sometimes we get to the point in the session where I might say, what is that person doing for themselves? So remember, it is that two-way street. Okay, it's obviously important to keep it very positive, keep lines of communication open at all times, be ready to adapt and negotiate and compromise if needed, but it goes both ways. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, if you are interested in finding out a bit more about specific conditions, traits and presentations, then have a look at that first session. The recording is on the Differently Wired Hub on the Foothold website. So this session, we're going to look a lot more very practically at how we can support people who are neurodiverse in the workplace. Hope that's okay with everyone. And I just want to place this, everyone, within the legal context that we have in 2023. So we do have the Equality Act, and as I've mentioned, people with ADHD, it's written on the slide there, but any other neurodevelopmental condition are considered legally disabled. And this means that they have a legal right not to be treated any less favourably in the workplace because of their neurodiversity. Okay, what does this mean? If you're an employer or a line manager or a supervisor, an employer is under a duty to consider making reasonable adjustments in order for that person to remain in their job. That's the bottom line. Okay, obviously we would be looking at looking for people to thrive in their job and work through and have opportunities to grow and be promoted within their role. Okay, just that last that circle in the bottom left that you can see, everyone. Just thought I'd mention this. In terms of ADHD, remember ADHD is the only neurodevelopmental condition for which there is a pharmacological treatment. You can get medications for ADHD. That does impact if your job involves a lot of driving, and especially if you're on a business insurance, for example. So I just always like to mention this. If you need further information, you might need information from the doctor to go to the DVLA if there is insurance there. But the big question for everybody in terms of neurodiversity in the workplace is, does the person disclose their neurodiversity or not? And take it from me, everyone, is I've come across many people in the workplace who have chosen not to disclose that they have a diagnosis of a neurodevelopmental condition. I do a lot of work in schools, and it's so interesting to me that very often I'll be in a school and we'll be talking about supporting children with conditions for up to a couple of hours, and then the session will end, and very often somebody will come up to me and she'll turn her back from the rest of the group and she'll talk to me in a low voice and she'll say, I was diagnosed with this, or I think I've got this, and I think, what are we whispering for? We've just spent the last couple of hours talking about how we encourage children to be comfortable with their own neurology, and here we have you as a professional in this institution who's struggling with that as well. Obviously, from where I'm sitting as a member of staff at the ADHD Foundation, I'm a huge advocate of diagnosis for many reasons, but the main reason is, I think, what it does to the individual. To really know and understand yourself is the first step to leading, isn't it, a healthy, happy, effective, successful adult life. And so I would support anybody going on that journey to get a diagnosis. I think we should talk about it openly, what we're ashamed about, what we want to be secretive about. Okay, so that's very much obviously my position on this. In terms of disclosing at work, I remember when I started this job 7 years ago, I did a couple of sessions for a group of trade unions in Cheshire. And we had this discussion, and the trade unions were very clear about this. They were saying, oh yes, you have to disclose, because if something happens, in your life, okay, and the difficulties arise in work, that you might be doing well at work, you might be managing your neurodiversity very well, and something can happen. We all have adverse experiences in life. Something happens that really impacts on your mental health, can then exacerbate some of the challenges and difficulties of your neurodiversity. But if you then go to your employer, you haven't got a leg to stand on really for what's gone on before if you haven't chosen to disclose. So I would really encourage people, but I do understand, of course I understand people's reluctance to do this, and I've talked to people who said, well, I'd be judged in the workplace. People would make assumptions about me. I wouldn't be up for promotions. They wouldn't consider me if they know I have X, Y, and Z. If you are an employer or a line manager, okay, accessing this webinar, then there are many things that you can do. The organization that you work for, have you got neurodiversity as a profile there as part of it? Are you engaging in national initiatives like Autism Awareness Month, which I think is in April, ADHD Awareness Month in October, Neurodiversity Celebration Week in March, our umbrella campaign through the summer? You put in front and center for your organization, we recognize neurodiversity. Are you doing case studies and profiling successful neurodiverse people that you work with their consent, of course, and so that anybody looking to apply for a job in your organization straight away can say, this is somewhere that's going to respect me. This is somewhere where I can go and disclose my neurology right from the very beginning, and it's going to be fine because this is an organization that is comfortable talking around neurodiversity. I'll give you one example, everybody, a great example that's just happened to me recently. It's not just happened to me, sorry, that I've just heard about recently, about disclosure. 12 months ago, this time last year, I ran a training session on this subject, neurodiversity in the workplace, for a large tech company in London. And after the session, a woman got in touch with me and she said, I've got a diagnosis of ADHD and autism, she said, and I haven't disclosed that. She said she was on a capability process because of two things. One was her work rate, and the other was her attitude, which sounded a bit strange, really. So we started talking about this. And she said she worked in a very big open plan office, very noisy, with lots of movement, lots of distraction. She said it was really hot in the place, and when she asked to turn the heating down, everybody complained that it was now too cold. Clearly she's got autism, she's hyposensitive to that sense of heat, so she obviously tolerates, she likes it quite cool. I like quite warm office environments. I don't know about you, but that's a feature of her autism. She said there are constant distractions around, so people are just interrupting all the time. There's lots. She said there's really harsh fluorescent lighting overhead in this office, so she spends every day on that borderline, possibly, of absolute sensory overload, which is a feature of autism. And she said to me, so that, she said, obviously is impacting upon her ability to the amount of work that she can do, because, you know, she's getting constantly distracted. She said to me that her line manager has a shared office. So when her line manager wants to talk to people one-to-one, she comes out into the main floor of the office and she sits really close, making very, very close eye contact, knee to knee, in the small space where this woman worked. And she would talk in a really low voice when she wants to talk, say, about, you know, in this case, about somebody's work rate. And that physical connection there, the closeness, and she's been asked to concentrate on something about talking about her work in this really distracted environment. And I said, what do you think's going to happen? And she said, oh, I'll lose my job. So what, because they're right, because I am not meeting deadlines, I'm not doing the work that I'm paid to do. And she said that I can understand how they might perceive an attitude. The attitude is that she's not that interested, because she said, when I'm talking to my line manager, I'm really, really struggling to hold it together with all of the distractions that are around. So I said, well, you know, without disclosing, what options have you got? Is there anywhere else you can work in that space? And can you use ear defenders? And we kept coming back to this idea of, well, if I use ear defenders, when people ask why am I doing it, what am I going to say? So we got to the point, really, and I said to her, you know, what have you got to lose? If you think you're going to lose your job anyway, you've got nothing to lose. Why don't you disclose? And she did, and it went really, really well. And they immediately said to her, you know, how can we help? And she said, I want to work from home. And so now she works from home in an environment that she can control. By the first week of working from home, by the Wednesday afternoon, she'd completed everything. She had to email a line manager and say, give me more work. With a little bit of space and time, she said she'd become really creative and inventive, and she was suggesting this ways that we can do things differently, ways that would save money, that would make things quicker, quite process driven. It's all she does a data management role, so real attention to detail, which is one of the strengths of autism. So now this is why I'm telling you, because she just emailed me the other day. She emailed me to tell you, not only has her contract been reviewed, the capability process is all over, but they've actually promoted her and given her more money. And the boss, the line manager, got her in and said, look, we're so impressed, let's create a role for you as a kind of troubleshooting problem solver, looking at systems and how we could do things better. And the line manager, bless her, said, you know, apologized to her and said, I had no idea idea. And actually said, this has been a huge learning experience for me in terms of thinking about barriers in the workplace. Absolutely. So I just wanted to share that with you. I completely understand people's reticence about disclosure in the workplace, but without people knowing and understanding, and remember, you have got legal rights. If you're in this position, you do have legal rights under the Equality Act as well. So I would encourage that, of course. Okay, so what I'd like to do is go right back to the beginning. Have a look, let's have a think about your recruitment and application process in your organisation. So on neurodiverse people even getting through the door here, and when they look at the application and recruitment process in your organisation, are they just being switched off at that point and saying, well, that's not for me, I don't want to go through that process? I would delivered a session for an energy company up in Scotland a couple of months ago, and they were all talking about a literacy and numeracy test that they had to do on their interview. And they had a clock that they could hear that was ticking. They had a time limit in which they had to do this written and this numerical exercise, and they had to do it in the time. And they all said, but the neurodiverse and the neurotypical people on the call, it was hugely stressful for them. And and they were saying, well, why are we doing that, really? And is that disabling for some neurodiverse people? I mean, I understand that a company might want to control their evidence of what somebody can do in terms of writing and doing maths. Then they were saying there was a lot of maths involved in most of the roles in this organisation. So I get that organisations wouldn't want to just rely on qualifications to do that, so they might want to do that, but the whole setup and the whole clock ticking and the whole pressure and that anxiety that will produce in some people would be absolutely disabling for some. And what are we looking for? Are we looking for what math skills somebody has at a certain level, or are we looking for their ability to do this in the set amount of time? And so thinking about recruitment and application processes that might automatically disable somebody right from the start. So as I mentioned before, when you're recruiting for a job, is it clearly stated that you welcome applicants from, all of those protected characteristics that we know under the Equality Act, but including neurodiversity? When somebody goes to look at your website or your social media platforms, is neurodiversity there? How do you send information, right, to people? In what format? Okay, do you do it? And also, I mean, and I would suggest this to you, is what feedback are you as an organisation getting from your neurodiverse employees? And I'm not talking about setting up support groups, although you might want to do that. I was talking to Just Eat recently. They've got a neurodiverse network of 400 employees all over the world that meet up at times and talk and share experiences, offer each other support, but also advocate for neurodiverse employees to the management of Just Eat. So yeah, I would include that, absolutely, some kind of network that is able to offer maybe reviews of practice. Let's hear it from the voices of people who are neurodiverse. I'm sure you've heard that phrase, not about us, without us. Are neurodiverse voices being heard about their experiences? But when we're sending out applications, are they easy to read? Have you got them in a Word document so it's quite easy for somebody to use text-to-speech software to convert that? Is the language, very clearly displayed? Visual processing is often a strength for people who are neurodiverse. So is the application process and the job description, is it quite visual? So things are put in boxes with arrows, for example, one skill, what's essential, what's desirable, etc. Are we following dyslexia friendly strategies? So are we looking at not loads of different varieties of fonts or colours, that we're using recommended fonts, and I'll talk about them in a bit, and spacing and sizing, so it's very accessible and easy for somebody to read? How do people reply to you in the application? So, for example, can they reply by telephone? If they're not, that they would prefer to do that rather than writing emails, or the other way around, of course. So how easy is it for somebody to reply? And then in an interview, the question I would ask you to consider if you are a line manager is what is the purpose of the interview? Are we trying to assess people who are good at interviews, or are you trying to assess whether you've got the right person for the role? So questions, for example, could questions be sent out in advance so that people have an opportunity to think through and consider their answers? I've already mentioned to you, and I mentioned in the first session, high levels of anxiety from neurodiverse people. Are we disabling right from the start? And if we gave questions beforehand, all right, then people will be less anxious, and you're more able to see actually what people can do in an interview situation. Are we giving extra time? Are you giving people the chance to prepare? Are you asking people to read stuff on the spot very quickly? Well, that's immediately maybe potentially going to disable somebody with dyslexia. So therefore, are we giving enough time, giving people the opportunity to read through materials more than once, preferably in advance? Okay. Are we very open in an interview situation about reasonable adjustment, saying to people, what might you need, and are there the facilities within your company to offer access to assistive technology? That's a huge field now. There is so many exciting things out there, programs, software, but also physical equipment, standing desks, wobble chairs, ear defenders, little screens around to give people privacy. So is it clear that you are willing to invest in and fund things like this, or indeed you've got them already in your workplace, so that people know that? Can people have a bit of a separate room, maybe just to get away during an interview process, to be on their own in a low arousal space, particularly for autistic people? Can they make notes in an interview, for example? Take a pen and paper in. If you've got a question that's in a number of different parts, might really help somebody to jot that down to help them. We've all got tongue-tied in an interview, haven't we? Have you ever said, sorry, can you ask the question again? I certainly have in an interview. All right. And what is the interview? Maybe asking someone to sit in front of a panel of people isn't the best way to get that, to find out how good they are. Asking people to sit for long periods of time. We know ADHD involves physical hyperactivity, so giving people the option of standing up or moving round. But could it be away from that traditional panel question and answer format? Could there be more work-related tasks, more practical tasks, more work-based trials, for example? Also, processing time in an interview. That's one of the hardest things. I'm sure if any of you have had interviews, that sometimes you think, I've got to answer really quickly, because I've got a show, and sometimes you start off, don't you, quite disjointed and a bit lacking in confidence. Then you get into it and you start going on a roll for some people. But think about giving people processing time. Ask a question. Okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think about that. You don't have to speak for the next 5 minutes while you have a think about that question. The environment where the interview is happening. Think about peripheral distraction. Attentional dysregulation or variable attention is a feature of ADHD, of autism, of Tourette syndrome, of dyspraxia. So if you're having an interview in an office where there's movement and sound, or by windows where there's people moving outside, that's going to immediately be distracted. So let's think about how we reduce all of that and give people opportunities to move. Thinking about processing time, as I've mentioned, is breaking down questions, asking one part of the question at a time, avoiding those multi-part questions in an interview, and just remembering that there's a lot of stress and anxiety with people who are neurodiverse. Add into that an interview situation, and you can see immediately some of the challenges, can't you? Right. So are there times in that interview day? I can remember doing an interview where I was rushed from activity to activity, into an interview, into another interview, into a panel talk, one after another, without any time to kind of help get my breath, think about what I was doing. And by the end of it, I was just running on adrenaline. Just right, what's the next question? Thinking I don't quite know who I'm talking to, but give people that chance to just kind of regulate themselves, have breaks between different activities can be a good strategy. But remember, are we disabling people right from the very beginning, before they've even got the job? Now, when people have been employed and they're neurodiverse, there's a lot of information on this slide. I know, I do apologise, but these are some of the things that you could see. Now, remember, we are talking at the moment about some of the challenges and difficulties in the workplace. Remember, as you can see in the box on the right, those last few lines down there, is that, one of the ways that we can really foster self-esteem, self-belief, confidence in the workplace for neurodiverse people is to do something called, what I call, building competencies. Now, the word competencies comes from the work of Kenneth Ginsberg, a great American psychologist who specializes in mental health and resilience. And he talks about, go and have a look at his work on YouTube if you're interested. He talks about the 7 C's of resilience. And one of those is competencies. And this means that if somebody's doing what they really like and what they're really good at, if that can be a part of their job, some aspects, maybe all of their job, it helps them to be more resilient to the parts of their job that they find more difficult. I was working with for the Ministry of Defence a few years ago, and I was working with groups of kind of civilians, if you like. There's staff, I think that was the term they used, and I was working with different teams talking about neurodiversity. And there was one team there that was brilliant, and they were the most successful team in this organisation. And I asked them, why are you the most successful? And they said, we play to our strengths. And they had one man in the team who had ADHD, and they said he's the big ideas bloke. He's the one who comes in and, says, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? And he's very, very creative, has loads and loads of ideas. And my boss has got ADHD, and we call it throwing grenades. He'll walk into the office and he'll just go, we should do this, we should do this. And he throws grenades and he walks out. And it's up to the rest of us then to unpick it and make it happen. Okay. And they had a woman in this team who had autism, and she was incredibly good at, it's called monotropism. She was incredibly good at really seeing the detail of things. So she was the person who worked out the plans, who sorted the money, worked the finance. It was her who led continuous review, and really held this person with ADHD in by the reined them in. And she was the person that actually put these creative ideas into practice. And those were, obviously, I'm not saying that people with autism aren't creative. Of course they are, they can be, all right. But in that particular team, the way in which the specific makeup of that team, and the way in which they were really embracing the positives and qualities of their neurodiversity within the team was really, really working for them. And we're not shying away from some of the issues that we can have in the workplace. And there, if you've had a chance to have a quick look through, is some of them that you will see with a range of different conditions. RSD, everybody, is, if you've not heard of this, it stands for rejection sensitive dysphoria, or rejection sensitivity, some people call it. Now, it's associated with ADHD and autism particularly, and this is where people have have stress responses to being criticised, find criticism quite difficult. Can I just say, everybody, if you've got if you're recognizing this, maybe with somebody that you work with, or maybe yourself, then there's a great online website for ADHD called Additude.com from the States. And if you go on that website, Additude is like attitude but with 2 D's. and you type in rejection sensitive dysphoria or rejection sensitivity, you'll find a survey there that you can fill in yourself or with someone else if you want, where you can gauge the degree to which somebody is rejection sensitive. What I would suggest to you, if you are recognizing it, or you're working with somebody, or you've indeed got a line management responsibility for somebody, then think about your language. I mean, we're talking about adults, so you can work with people who are adults. You can negotiate with them and talk about, am I saying anything that that is triggering you? So, you know, phrases like, well, you've done that wrong. That's wrong. Do it again. Okay, stop doing that. No, don't. The words like that and phrases like this can be triggering for people, and they immediately go into a stress response, and the brain is flooded with cortisol, and then it's very difficult for them then at that stage to then listen, to then think and reflect and remember, and then think of to work with you to come up with an alternative way of doing it, or plan to do it again, whatever is the case. But if we adopt a more neutral, anxiety reducing language with somebody, and we can agree it with them, that would stop those triggers, it would help somebody to be more effective in terms of managing criticism. So you might have language like, okay, well, what you and I need to do next, where you and I are going to move to next is, which is another way of saying, well, actually, you're going to do that again, but you're just not using that sort of language. But do have a look at that survey if you recognise this. It's not in the diagnostic criteria for either ADHD or autism. In my opinion, it should be. So those are some of the issues. Can I just recommend this, everyone? I'm reading this at the moment. I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and it is excellent. The British Standards Institution last year produced a report called Design for the Mind, and it's all about environment, the built environment, and is your workplace neurodiverse friendly? It's very, very detailed and very thorough, and that's why I like it. And it tracks lots of different features, things we've talked about, attentional dysregulation, but also sensory sensitivities. When I talked before about that woman that I worked with the fluorescent lighting and the noise and the sound of that open plan office, and there's a lot of information in there about things that you can do to reduce sensory sensitivities. So if you're interested, if you've got any role in terms of changing or adapting your environment, or indeed the organization you work for is got a new space that needs thinking about, then do please have a look at that. I would highly recommend it. Okay, right, what time is it? Okay, we've got another half hour, everyone. Hope you're doing okay. Remember, walk around, fidget, doodle, get up, stretch your body, whatever it's going to take you to regulate your attention while you're accessing this webinar, then go for it. Let's talk about what I call my 5 key principles for the workplace. Well, if I've got a line management responsibility, or indeed you're neurodiverse and you've got any scope or ability to adapt what you're doing, then as a principle, let's say that we're all on board with the idea that we need to adapt our approach in some way. Okay, if it's not working, then we need to change. Making those workplace adjustments. You can go online and you can just type in sensory audits. And I would suggest that you do this. Or if you have somebody in your team who's autistic or got ADHD or dyspraxia, is to offer this and to say, let's think about sensory sensitivities. You as a manager understand that can be part of your neurodiversity. How is it going? How is the environment in which you're working? Is it working for you, or is it actively disabling you? And therefore, we could fill out this audit together, find out what the sensory sensitivities are, and then use that as a starting point for adapting the environment. And meetings, how are we planning meetings? I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail in a few minutes, everybody, but meetings can often be quite difficult for certain people, especially with attentional dysregulation. Are you open to looking at some of the assistive technology that is out there? And there's a lovely website called www.mycomputermyway.com, which helps with adapting your screen. So your preferred fonts, your preferred spacing, if you need a coloured overlay, which people with Ehrlich syndrome or some people, not all, with dyslexia might really use. So you can have that. You can have notifications taken off so that there's nothing pinging in and that's going to be potentially distracting. But is there an openness to exploring assistive technology? That was www.mycomputermyway.com. Okay, a lot of people have used that, and I would recommend that. You're welcome. Are we gaining the support of colleagues now? I've heard of bullying in the workplace, more notably social isolation in the workplace. That's recognised as an issue for autistic people. People, if somebody's if neurotypical people, are seeing somebody who responds and communicates quite differently, they might start moving away from that person, and that can be challenging. So have there been training opportunities in the workplace? Do people understand that people's brains work differently, that if somebody just keeps saying no to drinks after work on a Friday doesn't mean that they are aloof or don't like anybody or not interested in anybody? It just might be that setup isn't for them. Does the team understand this? Can we have open conversations in a workplace? If for example you're going to give somebody the option of going into a quieter space to do their work, for example, just to reduce peripheral distraction or sensory or emotional or cognitive overload, then when other people start saying, well, I'd like to sit in that room and do my work, actually, is it open and honest and transparent that we just say, well, no, she's in there because of her autism. She needs to have a quieter space. You don't, right? Are those conversations, open and honest? Are we getting the support of colleagues? I've worked with a number of businesses that have created buddy schemes, especially for employees with ADHD and poor memory. So these are just people who just are reminders of people. How are you getting on with that? Have we done that yet? Okay. Remember, you said you're going to do that by 5 o'clock, not in a in a micromanaging or bullying or intimidating way, but with agreement with the neurodiverse person, that their peers in the workplace can be a great strength. As I mentioned before, we talked about, are you focusing and playing to somebody's strengths? What are they really good at? And, as part of their job, can we do more of that? I've worked with a number of different companies where we've worked out support plans for people, and if there is opportunities for delegation, for some work to be taken off somebody, to let somebody shine and thrive in what they're doing. I worked with a charity that was selling a product, and they were talking about a man there with ADHD, and he was a great seller. He really had the gift of the gab. He was really good at networking with people. He was selling more of the product than anybody else, but they were saying his kind of admin, his reporting, his paperwork, they said, was shocking. It was really bad. Okay, and he was, that he was getting kind of himself into trouble really with his blind managers, and this was having a knock-on effect on his mental health, and it was having a knock-on effect on his confidence. And what we decided in the end was that if some of the paperwork could be done by somebody else, and they were exploring digital options to make this easier, let's let him get out there and sell, because that's where he's happiest, and that's where he's most effective, focusing on somebody's strengths. Feedback is really key, and continuous feedback as well, particularly for people with ADHD. I would suggest is people, need one of the issues that I talked about in the first webinar, and remember you can access the recording, is something called executive functioning, the way in which our brain plans, organizes and regulates itself. One of the executive functions is self-monitoring, your ability to monitor yourself as you're going along. Now, we know that the executive functions can be impaired, and there can be challenges there with all of the neurodiverse conditions. can look differently depending on the condition, but the ability to really self-monitor yourself is a feature or an impaired ability, sorry, of ADHD, of dyspraxia, of Tourette syndrome, people who get really stuck into something, or that real hyper focus that you get with ADHD, or that real tunnel focus that you get with autism, you know, means that somebody might get really stuck into doing something and loses the sense of the rest of their job. I was working with a housing association with sites all over London, and they had caretakers who kind of managed these sites for them all day. So they were out of the office. So I was working with a group of line managers, and it was quite tough for them to kind of really get to grips on what was going on, because these workers were all over London, and they had one man who had just got an ADHD diagnosis in his late 20s, and they said he was brilliant with the tenants, and he would turn up on site with a list of things to do for that day, and then he would get dragged in by tenants, and he would end up helping them out. And there was one of it was sheltered accommodation. All the kind of, the older people loved him, and he was really helping them, and he was doing jobs for them and all of this, but he wasn't doing the jobs that he set out to do. And he was, so that feedback that we decided upon by the end of the session, where managers were going to do quite regular check-ins, and the big issue there was around capacity, but just to check in throughout the day, just to remind this person that, how are you getting on with this? How are we getting on? You can't help that tenant now for the next 2 hours because you've got this to do. Let's see what we can do. And they were setting boundaries with him really clearly and saying to him, you can help the tenants for this amount of time today, but the rest of it, there are these jobs that have to be done. I've worked with people who've created a support plan that's been quite micromanagement, and particularly around setting boundaries. And I worked with a company with a line manager who, by the end of it, came up with a plan for one of their employees where they were not asked to answer phone calls for a certain amount of time. It was, you work on this, right? You don't answer email, you don't answer the phone, right? And then you work on this for this amount of time, and then you answer phone calls. We don't expect you to answer every call immediately. We don't expect you to respond to every email. You have a block of time where you do that, and then you do this, because this person was just getting sucked into their inbox and and on the phone, immediately responding to everything, and they were losing the sense of what else they had to do. Okay, so those 5 principles, I would say, form an overarching approach to how you support people in the workplace. Now, I did mention this before, very briefly, but I just want to talk about dyslexia for a second, and I'm sorry about the text being so small, because that's not very good dyslexia practice, but I did want to try and get it all onto one slide. Do apologise. Dyslexia is recognised as the most common learning difference, 1 in 10 people. And obviously, if you know anything about dyslexia, you know that it impacts on somebody's ability to read fluently and efficiently and effectively. Now, obviously, in the workplace, we're talking about adults. And any adult with dyslexia will have developed for themselves a whole range of strategies to enable them to do that. But if the job involves a lot of continuous reading, then that can be quite tiring for people who have dyslexia. Of course, they will be working twice as hard as anybody else who hasn't got dyslexia to manage all of this reading. For example, if you are a line manager, please never say in a meeting with anyone with dyslexia, can you just read this out loud? All right. If you are going to give people reading to do in a meeting, then make sure that you give them the opportunity to read it a couple of times. And let's think about how written work is presented to people. You know, if you've got an incredibly long report that you're going to send to somebody, but not all of it is essential, right? And you're going to send it to somebody with dyslexia, send them some information or communicate to them some information about what are the most important things that you need them to read. What are the priorities? Maybe highlight them, maybe bring that out of the text, you know, and or put, you know, make it very, very clear where somebody starts, because looking at a huge, big, long report, you know, could be quite overwhelming for somebody. How much do they actually need to read? What is essential? And direct them towards that. But also just practice some very standard dyslexia friendly strategies. So we are reducing as much as possible the amount, or removing completely, I would argue, the amount of black on white text that we're sending to people. So I would have the conversation with somebody with dyslexia and say, what colours do work for you? You can see my slides, can't you? I've got a kind of a beigey colour, and I've got or blue, very light blue, right? What is to be avoided, everyone, is the same colour on the same color background. Now I don't use black. I use the darkest blue on my laptop, and I use the lightest blue background. And I've spoken to colleagues of mine who are dyslexic, and they've said that's okay, that works for them. White lettering on a black background or very dark background can work well as well. But I think, as we said before, remember, is you start with the person. Yeah, what colours work for you? And then when they tell you that, make sure that that's what you follow every time. So if you're giving hard copies of things, make sure it's on that coloured paper. If you're doing slides, all right, for a presentation, make sure that every slide has that. Let's move away from black on white text. Now on this slide, what you've got is some suggestions of things that you might do to reduce what is called visual stress. Now, visual stress is very, very common with people with dyslexia, but it does impact on other conditions as well. ADHD, autism, where there is attentional dysregulation and cognitive hyperactivity that I spoke about in the first presentation. So if you have a quick read of this, always follow the left to right, up to down rule, or top to bottom rule, right? Which means that make sure that the content of what you are producing always goes left to right. If you're using columns, make sure that it's very clear that you go from the top to the bottom. Make it easy for somebody to navigate their way through any written text that you give them. There are free, if somebody's saying to you, you know, I've got headaches, I feel uncomfortable, you know, and it's not about their vision, they've had an eye test, you know, that's been ruled out. It might be that they're experiencing visual stress. On number 2, you can see there, excuse me, is some free visual stress tests that you can do online, or you can direct your colleagues to, that would assess whether or not visual stress is an issue. And then that's a good starting point then. So coloured paper, as we've mentioned, if you want anything to stand out in a text, look at what I've done here, right? Don't use capital letters, don't underline, don't use italics, just put it bold, right? So it's very clear, and be consistent about this. Don't use lots and lots of different fonts in a presentation because you think it looks good, right? No, stick to the same font. And what I've got for you there are some suggested fonts and some suggested sizes, both for paper and for slides, okay, and the recommended spacing as well. But the message from me, everyone, of course, when dealing with adults, is always have the conversation with them. You tell me that if I'm going to ask you to sit in a meeting for 2 hours and I'm going to present a whole load of slides to you, right, what is going to work for you? Okay. All right, well done, everyone. You're still with me? Okay, I hope you're finding this interesting and useful. What I'm going to do is offer you some more strategies, 7 strategies here around supporting neurodiverse staff. I mentioned it briefly already in terms of awareness training, but a number of companies and businesses that I've worked with recently have put in place what one company called a neurodiversity champion or advocates in the workplace. just to help people. This is not about line management, okay? This is because it takes all of that dynamic out of it. It's somebody in the workplace who is a peer, okay, where somebody can just go to kind of maybe ask questions, to offload a little bit. I'll give you an example of this where it's worked really, really well. I was working with a computer gaming company here in Liverpool, and the kind of a huge majority of their staff were neurodiverse, and they had a tech arm to them where they did technical solutions for businesses and companies, and it was a big open plan office. There was about 200 employees, and they moved teams constantly. So a job will come in that where there's a really tight turnaround. It could be days, and they have to put together a team very quickly, and that team just has to get on with it. But there's other projects where the team will be together for months and months, working on projects, even years in some cases. So there was a lot of fluidity, there's a lot of change, there was a lot of unpredictability about it, and they were working with a group of autistic colleagues who were finding this really, really challenging, and particularly around what's called social imagination or social interaction. Now, just think of this, everybody. If you're put together with a team and you've got 48 hours to find a load of tech solutions for a company, and there's real pressure, then that team just kind of gets their head down and does it. Yeah, you put together a team for months and months, and that team starts to bond. They start to want to be known by their colleagues. They start to make friends. They start to develop structures and social activities and routines and a culture. All going out for drinks on a Friday, celebrating people's birthday, all of those kind of things. And some of the people with autism are finding all of this difficult to navigate. Is how much do I talk to people? Do I get involved in all of this, the bonding and the routines that have been set up? Some people with autism can struggle with, for example, what is appropriate and inappropriate things to talk about in the workplace. How do I talk? By the volume in which I spoke. They had one young man who they did some work with around the volume of his voice, because he was just talking in a very, very loud voice in an open plan office, which was very distracting for other people. So instead of a line manager sitting somebody down and saying you've got to do X, Y, and Z, they had this neurodiverse champion who was just a listening ear and would just offer suggestions, and and I spoke to this person, and they were saying they'd had conversations like, well, you don't have to go out to the pub on a Friday. When you get up to make a cup of coffee, ask everybody else if they want a coffee. That's what everybody does in this little team. That's what's being established. Okay, and that was working really, really well. There was another company down south who had passports. Now, I thought this was a great idea. They created a system of passports where people who are neurodiverse got to say what do they like, what do they want, what works for them in the workplace. And this was a similar company in the sense that there was a lot of change, a lot of movement, a lot of teams being put together, doing pieces of work, being disbanded, people being pulled out of teams and moved into others. So a lot of unpredictability and a lot of change, which can be challenging for autistic people. And these passports were telling the line manager or the project lead straight away what to do, and they just handed it to them when they joined the team, and then that person put those adaptations in place for them. And number two on here, we've talked about dyslexia friendly practice, of course, but just thinking about instructions, what we know, I mentioned it before, auditory processing can be more challenging than visual processing for neurodiverse people. So if you've got instructions or lots of bits of information, always put it both in writing and verbally. So when you're passing someone on a corridor and you're a line manager and they've got ADHD and you say, can you do X, Y, and Z for me? And the person says yes, and then walks off, I would not for a minute think that means that's going to necessarily happen. What we know with a range of neurodevelopmental conditions, that there can be challenges with what's called working memory. Now, if you're not familiar with working memory, we have lots of different types of memory. I talked about this in the first session, but working memory is your ability to hold information in your brain temporarily, but at the same time, simultaneously, this is why it's a bit different from short-term memory, simultaneously doing something with that information, planning, organizing, regulating. You know that yourself, you know that when you, or if you're neurodiverse, then you'll know colleagues of yours who can do this. They'll sit in a meeting, their manager will be giving them something that they want them to do, and in their head, before the manager has even stopped talking, you've organized it. It's in your to-do list. You know exactly what you've got to do. You know how to start. You know what resources you need and who you need to talk to. Okay, and all of that planning and organization, right, can be challenging for people who are neurodiverse. So always back things up. In writing, make it as visual as possible, especially if it's a plan, different stages of the plan. If it's appropriate, you might want to put time limits in there. So an impaired sense of time is a particular feature with ADHD, people that live in the moment, and you might have to do time estimation activities with people and say, this is how long I think this is going to take you, and this is when I think you need to start this. And the more honest and open we are, and the more disclosure there's been, those conversations should not be, in theory, should not be threatening to somebody. You're just recognizing their neurology and supporting them with that. Confidentiality, of course, is really key. Okay, well, I've got about another 10 minutes, Michael. So if you want to, if you've got any questions there. Okay, right. So if you let me know, Michael, I'm quite happy. There's another thing that I definitely want to talk about, and I'll shut up if there's any questions in the last 5 minutes. We did talk about feedback. I was reading some really sad research the other day about children who are neurodiverse and about the amount of negative adult attention that children get who are neurodiverse compared to neurotypical children over the course of their childhood and their time in school. And if somebody's come from that experience, then I would suggest to you in a workplace is and if you're a line manager, is have a particular real focus about remembering to give people some feedback and some praise. Remember, and when you praise, always be specific. If you're a line manager, don't say, you've done a great job, well done today. People go through that really quickly. So it's well done today when you did X, Y, and Z. I really appreciate that. Now, I know that if you're a good line manager, you're doing that routinely for your team, but just make a particular effort with that, with someone who is neurodiverse. What I want to talk about is that I think that slide is self-explanatory. The middle one, of course, is remember peripheral distraction, especially for people who've got attentional dysregulation. Okay, but I just want whoops, something's going on here with my slides. See if it works. Now that's interesting. It's never happened to me before. Okay, what I'll do is right, that'll give you visual stress, won't it, everybody? Right, don't know why that's happening. Can I stop it? Okay. Right, are you able to look at me, everybody, and not look at that? I really don't understand why this is doing this, but my slides are going all. I tell you what we'll do. Michael, are you okay to stop me sharing, because that will give somebody visual stress there, and I'll just do the last 5 minutes. Is that okay? Michael, is that okay? I honestly do not know why this is doing this. Okay, I've still got them, so I'm fine. Oh, right, Sarah, well, that's fine, right? It's still on there for me, but never mind, I'll ignore it. Just the last thing that I want to say, everybody, and this is about meetings. All right, now meetings can be a critical part of somebody's working life. It's a time where, you are on show with other people. It's a time where lots of information is communicated, where plans are created, and let's think about meetings, especially with people who have attentional dysregulation and maybe communication issues with autism as well. Where's the meeting taking place? How long is the meeting? Is it absolutely essential? Are there opportunities within a meeting for people to stand up, to move around? Are you putting breaks in a meeting? Because people with ADHD have to move their bodies to focus and concentrate. So if you plan a meeting in a small space where somebody can't really move their body and you're going to do really focused, concentrated work, then you're working against their neurology within that situation. But often, some people have the conversation with some people with autism. Some people with autism like to would prefer to do it online, for example, to have meetings remotely. That woman that I talked about, who was then working from home, she was zooming into all of the meetings, was much happier with that, because again, she was still in the environment that she could control. She got to move around and walk around. She had a therapy dog that she couldn't bring into the office, but she had their therapy dog next to her when she was doing these meetings. The dog, obviously had a calming effect on her, so she was in the best environment in which to do these meetings. Also, in terms of attentional dysregulation, what can happen with some people with ADHD is that they can change the subject. They've got cognitive hyperactivity. Their mind can be going very, very quickly between subjects, and people can start talking about inappropriate things, not sticking to an agenda. So I would suggest to you, if have opportunities in a meeting where people can just dump ideas and be very, very clear about that. But if you're chairing a meeting, is make it really, really clear what the function of every part of the meeting is. This will help with people's communication issues. So you might have a beginning where there is a presentation of some kind, and so just be very, very clear with people. Don't think I'm being condescending here. I'm not. Right? Is saying, what the expectation is now. This is is that you're going to listen, and then we've got an opportunity for questions. What follows that then is an opportunity, a free for all. You can say what you like. We're going to record, we're going to take out of working memory what you're thinking about, and you can say what you like or anything around this subject. Now the next part of the meeting is, now we're going to make a plan. So all of the conversation has to be around, what are we actually going to do? What do we need? How much is it going to cost? All of those things, very, very focused. What you're doing is you're supporting what's called somebody's SQ. Now, SQ, if you've never heard of it, stands for situational awareness. And it's a theory that sometimes we go into situations where we're not really sure what is expected of us. So in a meeting, for example, I've sat in meetings where I've been thinking, oh, is this a talking shop, or are we actually planning to do something? Are we putting a plan together? And people with attentional dysregulation who get distracted easily, ADHD, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, can lose sight of that. What exactly is the function and the purpose of this? Now, if there's a bit of all of that within the meeting, then just separate it and make it very, very clear for people. And ask yourself, do we need to meet for 2 hours in this room? I was working with an art centre down in Cornwall, and what they'd done for somebody who had ADHD and was very, very highly distractible was they had stand-up meetings that lasted maximum 10 to 15 minutes. So nobody sat down. They was very, very focused, very, clear of, this is what we're going to talk about for 15 minutes. We're going to make these decisions, then we're going to go. And they said this was working much, much better for this person. Remember to give people materials in advance, especially if you're going to ask them to read stuff. Remember your slides. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here, aren't I? But remember, how much have you got on your slides? Is there too much for people? Are you giving people processing time within that? Okay, right then. So thanks, Michael. We've got a couple of minutes. Have we got any questions, Michael?
Hello. Oh, can you see me? There I am.
Hi,
sorry,
Michael.
yeah, not sure what happened before with the slides there. Apologies.
Well,
guys.
I've still got it. I've still got it here, Michael. It's just flickering through the slides, but I'm managing it. It's all right.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No idea what's going on there. I tried to unmute myself as well so I could help, but for some reason my mute function stopped working as well. So who knows? Right. Who knows what's going on? But yeah, no, guys. we are sort of at the end of the presentation now. Sarah, no questions from you. That's fine. Simon, do you have any questions at all that you want to put to Colin before we wrap up? Just pop them in the chat if you do, or if you don't, just let us know that you don't have any, and then we can move on to the sort of closing items. But I'm glad you liked the presentation, Sarah. That's really great.
Thanks, Sarah.
So hats off to you, Colin.
Okay. Well, right. Well, thanks very much for engaging in this session. As I said before, please, if you haven't done this, or if you weren't in the last session, please have a look at the last session. I hope you found some ideas and strategies in there to support neurodiversity in the workplace. And remember, the very key message from me, of course, is let's take a strength-based approach. What can people do? Let that be the focus rather than the complete focus on what people can't do. Thanks very much, everyone. My best wishes to you.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen now, just to wrap things up. Just a little bit more from Foothold that I just want to share with you guys. So just bear with me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, and we'll see what's going on here. Oh, yeah, there we are. Oh, that's the wrong one. Wow, what's happening? Come on, there we are. Right then, let me put this into presenter mode. There we are. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Can you see that, Colin?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so yeah, I'd say, guys, thank you for joining us today. Hope you found that really informative and useful. I thought it was a really great presentation there, Colin, so hats off to you. Very informative, lots of information in there. Then yeah, so just a couple more things for me. As I say, we do have these webinars quite regularly throughout the year, and we are actually doing another mini series this month as well, towards the end of the month. So that's all about your career, so actually quite relevant to what we're talking about today. So that's in terms of engineering careers, so how to get yourself into the job market, planning your career to maximize progression and lifetime earnings, and then developing a side income and making that transition into self-employment. So it's kind of like a progression through the series in terms of career, and those are on the 25th of January, 26th and 27th, all at 12 p.m. So if you do want to sign up for those, you can visit our website and go to the webinars page. They're all on there, again, completely free to join. So I'd love to see you there if you can join us for those. As I say, I mentioned at the start that we do run all these digital support content for free, and we do that through donations for our community. And these donations do make a much broader difference as well, not just in terms of helping us deliver content. So this is Stuart. He's an engineer who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at 55, and he really struggled. He had no idea that he was neurodivergent until that point, but he did realise that he was struggling in certain situations, so particularly with his communication style, and this would cause conflict with employers, his colleagues, his family even, and it actually had quite a severe impact on his mental health, and he actually did end up having a breakdown in late 2020, and that was exacerbated by COVID as well, but the challenges he was experiencing in his life certainly contributed to that, and we supported him through that breakdown, helped him get back on his feet, and sort of a bit further on from that, he sort of was having a conversation with a friend and he was telling her all about these challenges he was facing, and she suggested, have you thought that maybe you might be neurodivergent or autistic? And he did a bit more research. He'd never considered it before, and he told me as soon as he started doing this research, something clicked in his head, and it was like a light bulb went off, and he was like, oh wow, this could explain some things. So he looked into getting a diagnosis, but obviously there are routes to get those via the NHS in this country, but there's a long waiting list, and he couldn't afford to go private himself. So we actually funded a private assessment for him to get that diagnosis, and he's now in a much better place. Yeah, so it's fantastic. Great, yeah, fantastic. We're able to support him with that. So it really does go to show, not only that obviously when you get these diagnoses, you can start I guess adapting to the challenges that can bring, and actually bringing out the strengths as well, and you're in a much more informed position to do that, and that's really positive for Stuart and for everyone else in the community who is neurodivergent, but also again that your donations really do make a real difference to people who are facing all sorts of different challenges. So as I say, I would ask you to consider making a donation today if you can. and we'd really appreciate that here at Foothold. But you can support us in other ways as well. Obviously, we're a charity, so we do lots of different fundraising events and fundraising challenges. So you can take a look at those on our website. Some really fun activities on there that you can get involved with to raise funds for us. Or you can volunteer with us as well. We're always looking for volunteers to help us deliver our services. So that's another way you can get involved if you're interested as well. And I say, don't forget to join our Differently Wired Hub. I say it's completely free. Loads of information about neurodiversity on there for neurodivergent people and for employers and families as well. So it kind of covers the whole spectrum of neurodiversity on there. So definitely check that out and sign up if you haven't already. And last thing, you can connect with us as well, obviously online. So we've got our website there. You can connect with us on social media. And if you do find yourself in a position where you need support from us or you just want to get involved, you can call us on the number there or email us at contact@myfoothold.org. That's it from me. One more thing I will say is that the webinar has been recorded today, so we will be getting that out to you via email as soon as we can, hopefully tomorrow. If not, then it will be early next week. But the webinar will also be posted on the Differently Wired Hub as well, so you will be able to check it out again and refer back to anything that you found interesting in Colin's presentation. So yeah, that's definitely it from me now. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope to see you both at the careers webinars if you're interested in that later this month. And I hope you take care, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Brilliant presentation. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, guys.